I wasn't supposed to be nervous. I'd worked night shifts before, gas stations, warehouses, that diner off Route 12 where the lights buzzed like they were alive. But stepping into cold line processing felt different the moment the doors sealed behind me. The air hit me like a slap of winter. Not cold, frozen. Frozen into the walls, the floor, even the metal railings. Like this place kept something on ice that wasn't meant to thaw. I remember thinking it smelled wrong. A slaughterhouse should smell like blood and bleach. But this place smelled like an empty freezer that someone had been breathing inside of. The kind of smell that settles in your clothes before you know it. The guy training me that night, everyone just called him Briggs, walked fast and didn't bother to check if I kept up. "Clean the floors, keep out of the bays when the cutters are working," he muttered. "And if the main conveyor starts on its own at 3:33, don't stare at the belt, just step back, let it run." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because he didn't look like the type to tell jokes. He didn't laugh back. He didn't even blink. "Why 3:33? I asked. Briggs stopped walking. His breath fogged in the air, thicker than mine. "Just don't look," he said, eyes fixed straight ahead. "That's the rule." He left it at that. The rest of the shift was mindless. Mopping, spraying down drains, scraping congealed fat off tiles. The usual. My earbuds were dead, so I had nothing but the hum of pipes and the quiet thump of refrigeration units for company. Every sound felt too loud in that building, echoing down metal corridors like something was following just behind it. At 2:50, Briggs clocked out for his break and never came back. I assumed he went to nap in his truck. I didn't blame him. By the time I reached the main production hall, the silence had grown so thick it felt physical. My breath came out in clouds. The overhead lights flickered once, then steadied. 3:32. I wiped my hands on my apron, annoyed with myself for even glancing at the clock. Rules only scare you when they're meant to. 3:33. A click sounded behind the wall. Another. Then a deep mechanical groan rolled through the hall as the main conveyor belt lurched forward and began to move. No one had touched the controls. My heart jerked. I froze where I stood, mop still dripping on the floor. The belt rattled, picking up speed. Something scraped across the metal surface, slow at first, then in short, desperate bursts, like nails dragging. I felt the urge to turn my head, to look, to see what was coming down that line. But something, instinct, fear, maybe both, made me step back instead. The scraping grew closer. Wet, uneven. It sounded like something trying to pull itself together before it reached me. I didn't sleep the day after my first shift. I laid in bed with my jacket still on, staring at the ceiling, replaying the sound of that scraping over and over. I kept telling myself it was machinery settling, a glitch, a leftover carcass someone forgot to remove. But the truth was simpler and heavier. I knew something was on that belt, and I knew it didn't want me to see it. When I came in for my next shift, the temperature felt even lower, as if someone had left every freezer door open. My eyelashes prickled with frost by the time I reached the first corridor. Briggs was nowhere. No explanation, no apology, just gone. Fine, I'd work alone. Most of the night passed without incident. The machines were off, the halls were quiet, and my nerves eventually dulled to something manageable. At around 1:40, I reached cold room number 4, the one they told me to clean only if necessary. The kind of warning people say casually, but mean with their whole soul. I pulled the heavy door open, and a wave of air colder than anything I'd ever felt rolled over me. It stung my cheeks like needles. I stepped inside. That's when I saw him. A figure stood halfway down the aisle between hanging sides of beef. Tall, lean, facing a carcass with his back turned to me. At first glance, he looked like any other butcher finishing up late work, until I realized he wasn't wearing the uniform. No apron, no hairnet, no ID badge clipped to his collar. His clothes were dark, soaked at the edges, and wrong. Too old, too stiff, as if they'd dried after being frozen in the wrong shape. His elbows moved slowly, methodically, as if he were cutting, but I didn't hear any slicing. No knife, no metal, just that movement, smooth and deliberate, like he wasn't working on meat at all. I tried stepping back quietly, but the rubber of my boot squeaked against the wet floor. He stopped. Not gradually, not naturally, just stopped, like someone hit pause on a video. My breath stalled in my chest. He didn't turn toward me. Not at first. Instead, his head tilted, just a few degrees, just enough to show he'd heard me. His spine shifted with a soft crack, and he began rotating his body, inch by inch, until he faced my direction. That was when I understood why Briggs told me never to turn my back on him. The thing's movements were too smooth in some places, too jerky in others, like pieces of different people sewn together with invisible thread. His face was pale, but not human pale, more like the color of freezer frost. His eyes looked watered over, the way meat gets that glazed layer when it's left out long enough. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. I kept my gaze locked on him, backing slowly toward the door, moving sideways like I'd been taught around nervous animals. My heartbeat felt loud enough to shatter ice. He took one step forward. No sound, no shift of weight. Just closer. His feet didn't even press into the frost on the floor. I swallowed hard, never taking my eyes off him. "I'm just passing through," I whispered, my voice small and clouding the air with white mist. Another step. Slow, studied. I reached the door with my shoulders still angled toward him, fingers fumbling for the handle behind me. It felt like trying to pick a lock with numb hands. My pulse thudded in my ears. The moment my fingers wrapped around the metal, he moved, just a sliver, a twitch, but fast enough that my instinct screamed to run. I didn't. I couldn't. Turning my back felt like suicide. Instead, I sidestepped out through the opening, keeping him in sight until the heavy door finally swung shut between us. Even then, on the other side, I swear the cold clung to me, like something had followed me out. I didn't tell anyone what I saw in cold room number 4. I tried. I even walked toward the supervisor's office twice, but each time I reached the door, the words died in my throat. What would I even say? "Hey, someone in your freezer moves like he's being puppeted from the inside. Thought you should know." Yeah, that'd get me fired or tested. So instead, I kept cleaning. The temperature that night felt wrong in a different way, uneven, like walking through invisible pockets where the air pressed against my ribs. The pipes above me rattled every few minutes, carrying bursts of cold through the metal like veins pumping ice instead of blood. Around 2:10, I spotted someone in the break area. Harris, a cutter from the early shift. Older guy, heavy boots, face carved by too many winters. He wasn't supposed to be there that late, yet he sat unmoving at the table, staring at a paper cup half filled with coffee gone gray from the cold. "You're still here?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He didn't look up. "They told you the rules yet," he muttered. The skin on my arms tightened. "Which rules?" Harris finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were pale, not from fear but from exhaustion that looked decades old. "The ones we don't put on posters." He leaned back, joints cracking under his weight. "Rule 1, he said. "If the conveyor starts at 3:33, you step back and keep your eyes down. Doesn't matter what you hear. Doesn't matter who you think you hear." My stomach dipped. "Who I think I hear?" He didn't answer, just swallowed, throat bobbing. "Rule 3, he continued. "If you hear something from D-7, you keep walking. Don't ask, don't answer, don't open." "What's in D-7? I asked. He shook his head fast, too fast. "You don't want to know. And if you do know, it's already too late." He stood suddenly, pushing back from the table like the air had grown sharp around him. "Look, kid, there's reasons people don't stay here long. We get decent pay, sure, but the truth is, no one gets comfortable. Something in this place watches the night staff." Before I could press him further, Briggs entered the break room. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept since the day before. He glanced at me, then at Harris. "You talking?" Briggs asked, voice cold. "Just covering the basics," Harris muttered. Briggs' jaw clenched. Don't scare the new ones more than necessary, Harris snorted. Scaring them is how we keep them alive. Briggs didn't respond. He just stared at me, expression unreadable, then motioned for me to follow him. You're coming with me? We walked down the long service corridor leading to the heart of the plant. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped insects. Briggs didn't speak. He just moved fast, his boots striking the floor with a rhythm that sounded almost panicked. When we reached the maintenance area, he finally stopped, turned, looked at me as if weighing whether to say what he needed. You went into cold room number 4 last night. It wasn't a question, I swallowed. You weren't there, I had to do the rotation. You saw him, my breath caught. Saw who? His voice dropped to almost nothing. The one that shouldn't be there. Every instinct in me pushed back. If he's someone dangerous, we need to call. Briggs grabbed my wrist, hard enough that it stung even through the glove. Listen to me, that thing in there isn't someone. And it isn't dangerous the way you're thinking. It doesn't follow rules we understand. It reacts to motion. It reacts to attention. If you turn your back on it, you won't get a second chance. The air around us seemed to thicken. Why is it here? I whispered. No one knows. Some say it came in with a shipment years ago. Others think it crawled out of D-7 before they sealed it. Before I could ask anything else, the overhead lights blinked once, twice, then steadied. Briggs let go of my wrist. His voice dropped even lower. If you want to stay alive in this place, he said, learn the rules fast, and pray the belt doesn't run tonight. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me alone in the hum of machinery that suddenly felt too awake. For the first time since I started working here, I wondered if quitting would even help, or if whatever lived in this place had already decided to notice me. The rest of the shift dragged itself forward like something injured. Every hallway felt too narrow, every shadow too deep, every sound a little too sharp. I tried keeping busy, scrubbing drains, checking trash bins, wiping down railings, but my mind kept drifting back to Briggs' voice. If you turn your back on it, you won't get a second chance. I hated how easily those words sank their claws into me. Around 2:50, I headed toward the western corridor, the one nobody liked walking alone. It stretched long and straight, lined with old metal lockers that hadn't been touched in years. The air here always felt heavier, filled with a faint humming vibration that settled in your bones. Halfway down the hall, the lights flickered. Not the soft, tired flicker from bad wiring. This one felt intentional, deliberate. A blink, a pause, a dimming like the building itself was thinking. The temperature dropped so sharply I sucked in a breath. Frost crept along the metal seams of the lockers beside me, delicate and growing. My exhale turned into a thick cloud. Then came the sound. A single knock. Deep, hollow, unmistakably human. It came from the very end of the hallway, right where the forbidden door marked D-7 sat sealed shut behind layers of chipped paint and old warning labels. I froze. I didn't want to, but my body stopped moving all on its own. Another knock. 3 beats. Slow, measured. I shouldn't have moved closer. I knew that. But something in the rhythm pulled me forward like a hook in the stomach. Hello, a voice whispered from behind the door. I jerked backward so hard I nearly slipped on the frost. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't desperate. It was soft. Calm. As if someone on the other side simply expected me to be there. Can you hear me? The voice asked again, this time closer to the crack beneath the door. Please, please answer. I know you're out there. My heartbeat slammed against my chest. It sounded like a young woman. Maybe my age, maybe younger. Her voice carried that kind of trembling hope that made you want to help, even when you knew better. I didn't speak. I didn't trust my own breath. The cold intensified, pressing against my skin like a hand. The lights dimmed lower, humming in a strange, wavering tone. Open the door, she whispered. It's freezing. I don't know how long I've been here. I stepped back, then another step. Rule 3. If you hear something from D-7, you keep walking. Don't ask. Don't answer. Don't open. I turned away. That's when she said my name. I hadn't told anyone the name I used here. I kept it off paperwork, requested initials on my badge. Only HR had it, and they weren't working nights. Hearing it spoken aloud, soft, pleading, broken, made every muscle in my body lock. "Please," she whispered again. "You're the only one who stopped. Don't leave me." My throat tightened. Every survival instinct screamed at me to run, but something else, a shiver of recognition, held me there. Another knock, harder, faster, angrier. The light strobed, sharp flashes that carved the hallway into jagged pieces of darkness and white glare. The metal door shuddered, not from the knocks this time, but from something pressing against it from the inside, as if a palm or a whole arm dragged slowly down the steel. The voice changed, not in sound, in weight. The warmth in it vanished, replaced by something hollow, deeper than the cold around me. "I can hear you breathing," it said. That was enough. I backed away, refusing to turn my back to the door until I hit the far corner. Only then did I pivot and power walk down the hallway, every instinct screaming to run, but knowing full well that running might make it follow. The farther I got, the more the air loosened. The frost receded. The lights steadied. By the time I reached the main hall, my legs were shaking so badly I had to brace myself against the wall. I knew one thing for certain. No matter what was inside D-7, it wasn't human. And it knew I had heard it. It wasn't knocking for help. It was knocking because it wanted me to open the door next time. The house groaned when the wind pushed against it, as if the walls were trying to breathe. I moved through the hallway with the flashlight held tight, the beam trembling across peeling wallpaper and framed photographs that had warped from humidity. The air felt heavier than before, thicker, charged, like the moment before lightning touches ground. I kept thinking about that mirrored silhouette in the attic, how it had mimicked me exactly, even the tiny lift of my shoulders when I exhaled. That image clung to me like frost on skin. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw something new, muddy footprints across the wooden floor. They weren't mine. They weren't even shaped like human feet. The prints were long, narrow, ending in points, as if whatever made them walked on elongated toes. They led from the front door straight toward the living room, then vanished beneath the warped rug. I didn't want to check under it, but something inside me, curiosity, fear, or that awful instinct that says you're already in the story, you can't stop now, forced me to bend down. I lifted the edge. Nothing was underneath. The prints simply stopped, as though the creature had dissolved into the floor. My pulse hammered through my fingertips. I whispered, "You're imagining things," but the words didn't convince me. Not anymore. The clock on the mantel clicked loudly, each tick dragging like a nail on metal. Then another sound rose beneath it, breathing. Slow, deliberate, humid. I turned toward the window, and that's when the beam of my flashlight caught the reflection of a figure standing behind me. It filled the glass, tall, thin, crooked at the shoulders. My throat locked. I spun around, expecting it to be inches from my face, but the hallway behind me was empty. The reflection remained. It stood in the window, staring through the glass as if trapped behind it. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and though the face was blurred, I sensed its attention drilling directly into me. I took a step back. The reflection took a step forward, but the floor beneath me stayed silent. It wasn't mimicking me this time. It was approaching. The window pane shivered. A vertical crack split down the center like a growing smile. The creature lifted a hand, long, jointed fingers tapering to needle points, and pressed it against the inside of the glass. The temperature around me plunged. My breath fogged the air. I didn't wait for the glass to break. I stumbled backward into the hallway, tripping over the uneven floorboards, scrambling toward the kitchen. Behind me, the crack in the window spread with a single sharp snap. It sounded like a warning, or a promise. Whatever lived in the mirror upstairs wasn't contained to just the attic. It was moving through reflections, and now it knew exactly where to find me. The kitchen lights flickered when I burst through the doorway, though I hadn't touched the switch. Shadows crawled across the ceiling like spilled ink stretching into shapes. My chest burned with each breath, but I forced myself to stay quiet, listening. The house had gone still again, too still as if it were holding its breath with me. I edged toward the counter, gripping the dull kitchen knife I'd grabbed without realizing. The metal felt useless in my shaking hand. I needed to get out. The front door was only 20 steps away, but when I pushed into the hallway, the air thickened around me. The walls looked wrong, closer, narrower, the floor subtly slanted. I knew this corridor. I had walked it a dozen times since arriving. But now the angles had shifted, like the house was rearranging itself when I wasn't looking. My skin prickled. I took another step, and the boards didn't creak the same way. Their sound was lower, almost hollow. That's when I noticed the door. It stood at the end of the hallway where there had never been one before. Faded gray, slightly ajar, and breathing out a faint draft colder than the rest of the house. I shouldn't have gone near it. Every instinct screamed that. But fear has a strange way of pulling you toward the very thing you dread. Maybe because part of you hopes understanding the threat might make it less terrifying. I approached slowly, hoping the footprints wouldn't appear again. When I touched the doorknob, frost bit my fingertips. I pushed it open. The room behind it wasn't possible. It stretched far deeper than the house's layout allowed, longer than the footprint of the entire building. The floor was unfinished concrete, dust swirling like ash in the beam of my flashlight. The walls were bare except for dozens of mirrors, different shapes, different ages, all lining the space from floor to ceiling. Most were cracked. Some were shattered. Others were fogged as though something had breathed against them from the inside. I stepped in before I understood the mistake. My reflection didn't follow. In the nearest mirror, the me on the other side stood perfectly still while I moved my hand across the air. She stared back with a vacant expression, eyes darker than my own, shoulders slumped unnaturally low. A ripple passed through the glass, distorting her face. Then she smiled, a slow, strained curl of the lips, like the muscles weren't meant to move that way. I stumbled backward, hitting another mirror behind me. Instead of my back, I felt a pulse from the glass, like something inside it had shifted. The reflections surrounding me began to change. In some, I wasn't alone. A tall shape lingered behind my double, its hands resting on her shoulders. In others, my reflection's eyes were gone, replaced by swirling darkness that bled into the edges. A low hum filled the room, not mechanical, not natural, alive. My flashlight flickered. When it steadied again, one mirror in the far corner was glowing faintly, a thin white line forming across its surface. A crack, just like the one in the living room window. I didn't need to wait for it to open. Whatever was on the other side had already shown me enough of itself. I spun around, only to find that the door I'd entered through had vanished. The wall was solid, seamless, as though the house had swallowed the exit whole. The hum grew deeper. The reflections leaned forward, dozens of me watching with hollow patience. And somewhere among them, behind the glass, the creature pressed its hand against the surface. It had followed me into the room that shouldn't exist. And now there was no way out. Panic ripped through me, but my legs refused to obey. Every step toward the wall ended in cold, invisible resistance. The reflections leaned in closer, pressing toward me from all angles, their hollow eyes hungry for the smallest twitch of fear. I stumbled backward into the nearest mirror, and the glass didn't crack. Instead, it swallowed my image, my hand disappearing into its smooth, cold surface. The pulse beneath the glass throbbed like a heartbeat, but it wasn't mine. Not entirely. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The room vibrated with the low hum, now rising to a sharp, grating pitch that made my teeth ache. The mirrors flickered, images rippling like disturbed water. I could see dozens of me, each one slightly wrong, arms too long, necks bent at angles that shouldn't exist, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. And in the far corner, the tall shape I'd glimpsed in Cold Room No. 4 moved independently of all of them, gliding through the mirrored reflections as if the walls themselves were its corridors. It raised a hand, jointed and spindly, pointing at me. The room tilted. The air thickened, making every breath a battle. I realized then that standing still was more dangerous than moving. If I froze, I would be consumed, absorbed by those reflections, added to the crowd of wrong images that now watched me like a jury. So I ran, blindly, toward any gap, any break, hoping for a door. The mirrors began to shiver, the reflections flickering with anticipation. Shapes surged from one glass to another, following me in impossible ways, multiplying as if the walls themselves were alive. My foot caught on a protruding piece of metal. I fell hard, scraping my hands across cold concrete, tasting iron. When I looked up, the glowing crack in the far mirror was wider, a white slit stretching like a wound through the surface. It pulsed, beckoning. I scrambled toward it. One last hope. The mirror's surface seemed to breathe, flexing like a living membrane. I leaned forward, reaching with both hands, and everything blurred. The hum, the leaning reflections, the cold pressing into my chest. I felt a tug, a pull so strong it threatened to drag me inside, and in that moment I had only one thought: I have to get out. Then the flashlight flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the room. Silence fell like a weight pressing into my ears. I scrambled blindly, hands sliding across smooth glass, reaching for the crack that had promised escape. My fingers grazed the edge, then nothing. Cold concrete again. My own reflection stared back, but now it was too still, too empty. The room was quiet, too quiet. I heard a click behind me, something heavy, deliberate moving. My breath caught. I spun. Empty hallway. No mirror, no figure, just the faint hum of ventilation somewhere deep inside the walls. My heart slammed. I took off, feet pounding the floor, following a memory of the exit, the sound of the front door somewhere ahead. I burst through the service corridor and into the main hall. The conveyor belt sat silent, lifeless, as if nothing had happened. Cold air brushed my face. I reached the outer doors, yanked them open, and spilled into the night, gasping for fresh air. I ran until my lungs burned. Only when the parking lot lights blurred in the distance did I slow, leaning against the fence, drenched in sweat and frost, chest heaving. The house or the plant sat behind me, silent, empty, cold. I don't know if I made it out. I don't know if it let me go. All I know is the memory of the reflections, the tall figure behind the glass. The pull of the impossible room will never leave me. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the conveyor belt moving on its own at 3:33, and I swear I hear a soft, deliberate knock from somewhere I shouldn't be able to hear.